It was the summer of 2012, and I had just turned 25. I was living alone in a small town outside Flagstaff, Arizona. Back then, I didn't have many responsibilities, just a part-time delivery job and some freelance stuff on the side. I spent most of my free time hiking, fishing, or just exploring areas most people didn't care about. I liked the quiet and the feeling of being away from everything. That year, I got a weird idea in my head that I couldn't shake. I wanted to camp in a graveyard, not because I believed in ghosts or wanted something spooky. I just thought it would be interesting, quiet, peaceful, unusual. I didn't tell anyone because I knew they'd think I was doing it for attention, or worse, that something was wrong with me. But it wasn't like that. I wasn't chasing some thrill. I just liked the idea of being around something old and forgotten. Graveyards always felt like they were hidden in time. I chose a cemetery way out in the middle of nowhere. It was called Hollow Creek Cemetery, about 45 minutes away from town, on a dirt road that barely showed up on the map. It was small, maybe 30 or 40 headstones, most of them so old the names were worn off. The fence around it was falling apart, and there were no lights, no signs, not even a caretaker's shed. Just a few broken benches, some iron rods leaning where a gate used to be, and thick trees closing in from all sides. I packed my usual camping gear: tent, sleeping bag, flashlight, food, water, a little gas stove, and a pocket knife. I also brought an old military-style wool blanket just in case the night got cold. I made sure to bring a headlamp too, since I knew I'd need both hands free if I had to move around in the dark. I left around 5:30 in the evening, just as the sun was getting low. The drive out there was rough. My truck bounced over rocks and uneven patches, and I had to get out twice to move branches that had fallen across the road. I reached the cemetery just before sunset. The air was still. I parked a bit down the hill out of sight from the road, which, to be honest, barely existed, and walked the rest of the way in. There was something about walking through that rusted gate with my backpack on, the sun low behind the trees, that made everything feel distant. I didn't feel scared. Not yet. It was more like walking into a memory. Everything smelled like dirt and dry pine. I set up my tent just outside the edge of the graveyard, behind a large oak that had roots curling up through the ground. I didn't want to pitch my tent directly on the graves. That felt wrong. I cleared the area, laid down my tarp, and got everything set up. Then I made a small dinner, some canned chili and crackers, and sat on one of the old benches, just watching the shadows get longer. Around 9:30, it was completely dark. No streetlights, no houses, no cell signal. I had my little battery-powered lantern, but I kept it dim. I walked through the rows of headstones with the headlamp on, looking at the dates and names. Most of them were from the late 1800s. Some were children. A few had no last names, just mother or infant carved into them. I started to feel something, not fear, but a deep kind of loneliness. Like I was walking through the last pieces of people no one remembered anymore. I didn't want to go far into the trees, so I circled back and sat near the base of the oak until it got cold enough to climb into my sleeping bag. I lay there a long time with my headlamp off, listening to the wind in the trees and the faint crackle of branches settling. There were crickets, the occasional owl, and once or twice the soft rustle of something walking through the brush nearby. Probably a rabbit or raccoon. But around 1 a.m., something shifted. I was half asleep when I heard the sound. Not an animal, not wind. It was a dry crunch, like someone stepping on dead grass. My eyes snapped open, and I stayed still, listening. A few seconds later, I heard it again. One step, then silence, then another, slow, heavy. I sat up slowly and reached for my flashlight, trying not to make any noise. I didn't turn it on right away. I listened for maybe a full minute. The steps had stopped. Everything had gone quiet. Even the crickets. That was the part that bothered me most. I finally clicked on the flashlight and pointed it toward the edge of the trees behind the graves. Nothing. I waited, shining it across the row of headstones and up along the trail. Still nothing. I stood up and made a slow circle around the tent, checking for tracks. The ground was dry and hard, so nothing showed clearly, but I swear I saw the faint impression of a boot print near the roots of the oak. It wasn't mine. I had sneakers on. I didn't want to panic, but something wasn't right. I sat back in the tent and zipped it halfway, thinking maybe it was just my imagination. But then, right as I started to calm down, I heard it again, closer this time. One slow step on dry grass. I grabbed the headlamp and the knife and stepped out of the tent. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my neck. I kept the light low and started walking slowly toward the center of the graveyard. Every few steps I would stop and listen. The air was heavy and cold. That's when I noticed it. One of the headstones had been pushed over. It was lying flat on its back. I was sure it hadn't been like that earlier when I walked through. I remembered that one clearly because it had a carved angel on top that had been chipped in half. Now it was gone. I scanned around the area and finally spotted the angel head sitting 5 feet away from the rest of the stone. I started feeling sick. Not scared like horror movie scared, but real fear. The kind that makes your hands feel numb and your mouth dry. I didn't know who or what was out there, but I knew I wasn't alone. I went back to the tent, grabbed my sleeping bag and some of my gear, and moved it to a spot farther down the hill near where I'd parked. I didn't want to leave just yet. Maybe it was some stupid prank by local kids, but still, I didn't want to sleep right next to the graves anymore. The rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I lay under the stars with my back against the truck, watching the tree line. Once, around 3:40 a.m., I saw a flicker of movement between 2 trees. A figure, just standing there, not moving toward me, not walking away. I aimed my light straight at it, and it was gone. No sound.
No rustling.
Just gone. At dawn, I packed everything up as fast as I could. I climbed back into the truck and drove the hell out of there. The road felt longer than it had coming in. I kept checking the mirror. I didn't see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me the whole time. I never went back to that place. A few weeks later, I checked online for anything about Hollow Creek Cemetery. I didn't find much, just a couple mentions in old documents. But one thing stood out. There had been a caretaker back in the 1980s who went missing. Just disappeared one night while clearing brush. They never found him. The place was shut down after that, left to rot. I don't know if the person I saw or heard was some random drifter or someone living out in the woods. Maybe just another camper like me. But whatever it was, it knew the graveyard better than I did. And it didn't want me there. That was the last time I ever camped near a graveyard. I still go hiking and camping, but I keep to the marked trails now. Places where other people go. I learned that some places aren't meant to be explored alone. Not because of ghosts or legends, but because there are real people out there who watch, who wait, and who don't want to be found. I was 32 when I took a solo camping trip through the South Downs in England. It was early autumn of 2016, sometime in the middle of October, when the trees had started turning but hadn't completely lost their color. I had been dealing with a lot. Work was draining me. My girlfriend had broken things off a month earlier, and I just needed to step away from the noise. No phones, no emails, no people. Just silence, wind, and trees. I packed light, just a medium backpack with essentials, a compact tent, sleeping bag, some dry food, water, and a small stove. I planned to hike from Westmeath down to Cocking, about 35 miles over 3 or 4 days. Nothing extreme, just long walks and long nights under the sky. I didn't bring a gun or anything like that. England's countryside always felt safe to me. People were friendly, and most of the time I didn't see anyone else on the trail for hours, especially during weekdays. I parked my car near the village, left a quick note in the glove box saying where I was headed in case something happened, and started my walk just after noon. The first day went smoothly. The hills were gentle, the sky overcast, and the wind soft. I saw rabbits and a few deer far off in the fields. I reached a forest clearing by late afternoon and set up camp just off the trail under a small line of beech trees. I boiled some instant noodles, ate quietly, then crawled into my sleeping bag as the light drained out of the sky. There was a bit of rustling in the brush later, probably a fox or badger, but nothing alarming. I fell asleep quickly. The second day felt different. I can't explain why, but as soon as I woke up and stepped outside my tent, the woods felt heavier, still silent in a way that didn't feel natural. I brushed it off as my own nerves. I hadn't camped alone in years, and maybe I was just overthinking it. I packed up and kept walking. The trail climbed a little and then dipped through some farmland before cutting back into thicker woods. I didn't see a single person all morning. Around noon, I stopped near a dried stream bed to eat. That's when I saw him for the first time. He was standing far back in the trees, maybe 50 meters away. I only noticed him because he wasn't moving. Most animals rustle around or shift, but he was just there. At first I thought he was a scarecrow someone put up for some reason, but his head moved slightly as I stared at him. He had a long brown coat, darker brown pants, and something like a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. I couldn't see his face properly because the trees cast shadows over him, and he had a dark cap pulled down low. I tried not to react, just casually packed up my lunch and got moving again. I didn't want to make it obvious that I saw him. I glanced back a few times. He didn't follow, or at least I didn't see him again for hours. But the feeling stayed with me, like a film over everything, numb, gray, a little off. I pushed harder through the afternoon than I planned, and by the time I found a place to camp, I was sweating even though it was cool out. It was a narrow clearing with moss-covered stones and small birch trees around it. No real shelter, but I didn't care. I just wanted to be done walking. That night was awful. I didn't sleep. Every tiny sound had me on edge. I kept thinking I heard footsteps or branches snapping far off. I'd sit up, flashlight ready, but there was never anything there. Around 2 a.m., I finally fell into some light, half-awake state. That's when I heard it. Something brushing against the side of the tent. Not a scratch, not a gust of wind. Like a hand sliding slowly across the fabric. I froze. My flashlight was by my leg, but I didn't move. The sound stopped, and for a while I didn't hear anything at all. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to unzip the tent and peek out. There was nothing there. I scanned around with my light, holding my breath. Just damp grass, thin trees, and fog clinging low to the ground. No footprints, no sign of animals. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting upright with my knife in my lap. I didn't hear the brushing again. In the morning, I found something strange near the tent. A piece of twine tied around a twig, like someone tried to set up a marker. I hadn't seen it the night before. It wasn't natural, knotted tightly and wedged upright into the ground. I kicked it away and packed quickly. That third day, I barely noticed the countryside. I kept checking behind me, scanning through the trees. I heard nothing and saw no one. But around mid-afternoon, while crossing an open field with hedgerows on either side, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. I turned, and there he was again. The same man, standing still, half hidden behind a hedge, just watching. That time, I stared back longer than I meant to. I wanted to call out, but something about him felt off. His body language wasn't curious or friendly. It was like he didn't care if I saw him, like it didn't matter. I moved faster after that. I didn't want to stop, I made it to a denser wooded area by sunset and decided to set up one more camp before finishing the trip in the morning. My legs were aching, and I didn't think I could push all the way to the village before dark. I found a small dip in the woods and pitched my tent, this time setting up a small perimeter, hung my cooking pot to make noise, scattered a few rocks, kept my flashlight and knife close. The air was completely still. No wind, no insects, just silence. I didn't eat much. My stomach was twisted up. I laid in the tent with my shoes still on and my coat zipped up. The hours dragged by. Around 1:30 in the morning, I heard something again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching leaves, coming from the woods on the left side. I held my breath. The steps stopped a few meters from the tent. Then silence. For a long time, nothing. I didn't dare move. Then, a noise I'll never forget. The sound of someone slowly unzipping the outer flap of my tent. They didn't open it all the way, just a few inches, enough to make a gap. I lunged forward and shouted without thinking, crashing against the fabric from the inside, hitting the zipper area with my hand. Whoever it was ran off immediately. I burst out after them, light in hand, swinging it wildly through the trees. I saw movement, just a figure slipping between trees, coat trailing behind. He was fast, way faster than I thought someone his age should have been. But he didn't run in a panic. It was more like he'd already planned his escape route. I didn't chase. I didn't want to get lost or hurt. I just stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand, breathing hard. I didn't go back to sleep. I packed everything up right then and there and started walking in the dark, using my GPS and flashlight. I kept walking until morning, ignoring pain in my legs, cutting across muddy tracks, pushing through overgrown areas, anything to get out of that part of the woods. I didn't stop until I hit the outskirts of a small village called Singleton. I went straight to the pub, ordered a tea, and sat there shaking for a long time. I never saw him again. I didn't tell the police because I had no proof, no photos, no injuries, and I wasn't even sure what law had been broken. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. That man wasn't lost. He wasn't some hiker or traveler. He had followed me, watched me, and tried to open my tent. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't reacted when I did. I try not to think about it. I sold my camping gear a week later and haven't slept outdoors since. Even now, years later, I can't walk in the woods without thinking about that man in the brown coat and how quiet everything got just before he showed up. I still wonder how long he had been watching me, from the first night, or even before that. I don't think I'll ever go back to the South Downs. Not alone. Not ever. It was early November 2017 when I took a few days off and decided to go hunting alone in the Bitterroot Mountains of western Montana. I was 36 back then. I'd been working nonstop for months in a warehouse in Spokane and felt like I needed to get out into the woods, breathe some cold air, and just feel far away from everything. I'd hunted that area before, years ago, with my cousin, and remembered it being quiet, remote, and crawling with elk during that time of year. He moved to Wyoming, so this time I went alone. I had a dark green Ford truck, packed it up with my rifle, gear, tent, cooler, extra clothes, and some firewood. I left just before sunrise on a Wednesday and made it to the base of the mountains by midday. The sky was clear, air crisp, and there was a dusting of snow on the ground from a storm that passed a few days earlier. I followed an old logging road for a while, winding uphill through a dense mix of pine and fir trees. The road got rougher the higher I climbed, with snow patches in the shade that hadn't melted. After about 20 miles in, I found a flat clearing by a dead-end spur trail. It was tucked between tall trees and maybe 200 yards from a steep ridge that looked over a wide valley below. I could see snow-covered peaks far out on the horizon. No signs of recent tire tracks or campers. I felt completely alone out there, which was exactly what I wanted. I set up my tent just off the truck, got a fire going, and heated up some kin stew. I spent the rest of the day walking around the area, looking for signs of elk. I saw a few tracks in the snow and some fresh droppings about half a mile from camp, which was promising. That first night was cold but peaceful. I stayed close to the fire, kept my rifle nearby, and slept inside a thick sleeping bag in my tent. I parked the truck facing out, just in case I needed to leave quickly. I'm not paranoid by nature, but out in the wilderness, especially when you're alone, it pays to be careful. I didn't have cell service, and there weren't any nearby ranger stations. If something went wrong, I'd be on my own. The second morning, I woke up early before dawn and hiked up the ridge toward a series of small plateaus where I'd seen elk sign the day before. It was quiet, still, and the only sounds were the crunch of snow under my boots and the occasional bird overhead. Around 9 a.m., I spotted a small group of elk about 400 yards away, grazing near some thick brush. I stayed low, moved slowly, and waited for a clean shot. I took down a good-sized bull, my first in almost 4 years. I field dressed it as best I could, tagged it, and marked the location with a bright orange ribbon on a nearby branch. I knew I'd need to make a couple trips back and forth to get all the meat and antlers out. It was too far to drag the whole thing in one go, and I didn't want to hurt myself trying. By late afternoon, I'd hauled one load of meat back to camp and planned to go back in the morning for the rest. I kept the meat inside a cooler in the truck bed and covered it with a tarp and snow to keep it cold. That second night, I made a fire, ate quickly, and got into my sleeping bag early. My legs were sore from the hike, and I was drained. But around 2 or 3 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. At first, I thought it was the cold, but then I heard something crunching outside, maybe 20 feet away from the tent. Slow steps in the snow. I laid there perfectly still, heart pounding, listening. Could have been a deer, I told myself, or maybe a coyote, but something about the sound didn't sit right. The steps were heavy, too slow, like a person. I slowly unzipped my sleeping bag, reached for my rifle, and stayed quiet. The steps stopped for a few seconds, then I heard a thud, like something brushing against the side of my truck. I stayed inside the tent, holding my breath. Then I heard the sound again. Another thud, followed by the unmistakable creak of the tailgate being moved. It wasn't an animal. Someone was at my truck. I waited a few seconds, then carefully unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The fire had gone out, but the moonlight was bright enough to see shadows. I couldn't make out a face, but there was a man standing at the rear of my truck, messing with the cooler. He looked like he was wearing a dark coat, maybe camo.
No flashlight.
Just standing there, moving slowly, like he was trying not to make noise. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I just sat there inside the tent, watching him. After a minute or two, he backed away from the truck, walked around the side, and disappeared into the trees. I waited a long time, rifle in hand, barely blinking. My heart was thudding so loud it was hard to think. Eventually, when it felt like it had been at least 20 minutes without a sound, I unzipped the tent all the way and stepped out slowly. I scanned the woods with my flashlight, then checked the truck. The cooler lid was off, meat still inside, but some snow had been brushed away. I didn't see any boot prints at first, but when I circled around, I found faint tracks leading back into the woods. Big boots, heavy. I followed them a few yards, but they disappeared in the rocky patch uphill. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in the truck with the doors locked, rifle across my lap, engine off. Every crack of a branch outside made me flinch. Could have been another hunter who stumbled onto my camp. Or it could have been someone who followed the tracks I left dragging meat and was waiting for me to sleep. By morning, I was still on edge. I packed up camp in less than 30 minutes, loaded everything back into the truck, and drove out the same way I came. My nerves didn't settle until I was back on the highway, seeing traffic and gas stations again. When I got home, I called the Forest Service and told them what happened. They said they'd had some reports of vandalism and theft in that area over the last year, mostly from remote campsites and hunting spots. They said they'd send someone out to check, but that it was rare to catch anyone out there. Looking back now, I still think about that man, what he was doing out there, alone in the middle of the night with no light, walking straight into someone's camp like that. He didn't try to steal anything else. He didn't speak. He just opened the cooler, looked around, and left. It didn't feel random. Felt like he knew I was there, like he'd watched me. I haven't been back to that mountain range since. I still hunt, but I don't go alone anymore. And I don't stay overnight, not unless I'm with someone I trust. That trip changed the way I look at being in the woods. It's not the animals you need to worry about, it's the people. I was 32 when I went on that trip, and I haven't been camping since. It happened in the summer of 2018, somewhere in the Navajo backcountry near the Arizona-New Mexico border. I'm not native, and I don't pretend to understand their stories fully, but I'd heard whispers before about skinwalkers. People talked like it was just a tale, but the way they said it, with these quiet looks and lowered voices, it felt more like warning than fiction. I never believed in monsters, though. Still don't. But what happened out there, I'll never forget it, and I won't go near that land again. I had just quit a job I hated and needed a break from everything. City noise, phone notifications, faces. I'd spent some years hiking and solo camping across Colorado, Utah, and parts of Nevada, so I wasn't some beginner out there. I had gear dialed in, food packed right, and enough common sense not to do anything stupid. I picked a spot near the edge of an old, barely marked trail that broke off from an old forest road near Shiprock, New Mexico. The area looked almost forgotten. Sparse pine trees, dry brush, sandy soil, and rock formations that jutted out like bones. Beautiful in a harsh kind of way. I figured I'd spend 3 nights out there. I parked my truck off the road and hiked about 5 miles in, deep enough not to hear a single car, not even in the far distance. I wanted silence, and I got it. The first day was calm, warm but not unbearable. I found a good clearing to set up camp, with a little slope nearby and a few large boulders that helped block the wind. I made a small fire ring out of stones, boiled water from a collapsible jug, and ate freeze-dried beef stew from a pouch. Around sunset, the place turned blood orange, and then deep purple, then black. You've never seen dark until you've been that far from any town.
No streetlights, no planes o overhead.
Just stars, millions of them, and the sound of your own heartbeat in your ears. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was scared, but because the silence was so loud.
No bugs, no owls.
Not even the wind through the trees. Just nothing. Total stillness. I was used to hearing coyotes, crickets, distant dogs barking. But out there, it was dead quiet. I thought maybe it was just the altitude or how dry everything was. The next day, I hiked around the ridge to get a better view of the flatlands. About an hour into it, I noticed something strange. Boot prints. Not old ones either. The dirt had crumbled in a fresh way. Someone had passed through maybe the day before, maybe even that morning. They weren't mine, and they weren't heading toward any trail I knew. No tread pattern I recognized either, just flat, smooth soles like someone wearing those cheap rubber work boots. I didn't see anyone all day, but that got me feeling a little uneasy. It's not that people can't be out there. It's public land. But I hadn't seen any vehicles or other campsites. I hiked back toward my site slowly, checking over my shoulder more often than usual. Every branch snap felt louder. I told myself I was being paranoid. That second night, just after midnight, I heard something. It started as a low rustling in the brush. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened, still half asleep. It wasn't wind. It was movement. Something stepped on dry twigs, then silence, then a few more steps. Not fast, not running, just slow, careful steps like whoever or whatever it was didn't want to be heard. I stayed still, reached over and slowly unzipped the side pocket of the tent where I kept my flashlight. I didn't want to turn it on yet. My heart was racing. I knew animals moved at night, but the steps sounded like 2 legs, not 4. Heavy, deliberate. I waited. The steps circled halfway around the tent, then stopped. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then I heard the sound of something breathing, just outside the thin nylon wall. It wasn't sniffing like a dog. It was a slow exhale, like someone just letting air out quietly through their nose. Then all at once, nothing. Gone. No more steps. No sound of walking away. Just gone. I stayed frozen in place for at least an hour, barely blinking. Eventually, I laid back down, but I didn't sleep at all. When the sun finally came up, I crawled out and looked around. Nothing obvious. But when I circled about 20 feet out from my tent, I found the prints again, those same flat-soled boots. They circled the tent once, paused on the east side, and then disappeared into the brush heading uphill. I packed my gear fast. Something about it didn't feel right. I told myself maybe it was a lost hiker or some weirdo, but why circle my tent in the dark? Why not say something, call out, or shine a light? Why just stand there breathing? I decided to hike back out, but I didn't go straight to my truck. I looped wide, circled around through some rocks, and stayed quiet. I moved slow, trying to catch a glimpse of anything out of place. That's when I saw it. About 200 yards down the ridge, through a gap in the brush, I spotted someone standing near a tree. Not moving, just standing there. They were wearing a big brown coat or robe or something loose, even though it was hot. I ducked down and watched. The figure didn't move for minutes. No shift in weight, no head turning. Just perfectly still. I slowly backed away and took the long way down to my truck. When I got back, my truck was untouched. Nothing on the tires.
No scratches.
No signs anyone had come near it. I didn't waste time. I threw my pack in, locked the doors, and got on the road. But here's the part that stayed with me the most. About 20 minutes down the dirt road, I saw fresh tracks. Boot prints again, walking along the side of the road, like someone had followed me from the woods. I didn't stop, didn't even slow down. I made it back to Flagstaff that evening and checked into a motel. I took the longest shower of my life and laid on that stiff mattress thinking about every sound, every shadow. I didn't tell anyone the full story for a long time. When I finally did, someone asked me if I thought it was a skinwalker. I don't think it was anything supernatural. What scared me was how human it all felt. The stillness, the breathing, the way that person never spoke, never ran, never tried to scare me, but just watched. It felt like someone who knew that land better than I ever could. Someone who knew how to move through it like a ghost. I think they were living out there, hiding, maybe surviving off the grid. Or maybe they wanted me gone. Maybe they didn't like outsiders. The stories about skinwalkers, those aren't for me to say. But I do think some people act like monsters, especially when they know no one else is around to stop them. I haven't been camping alone since, and I never will again. I went on a solo camping trip in late October of 2013, just after I turned 31. I had been going through a rough few months. I'd lost my job earlier that summer, and things weren't going right with the woman I'd been seeing for almost a year. I wasn't sleeping well, and I found myself on edge most days. So I figured getting away for a bit would help clear my head. I had always found peace in the quiet of the outdoors, especially places that were out of the way with no one around. I drove up from Evansville, Indiana, and set up camp in a remote part of Hoosier National Forest. It's a big place, full of winding gravel roads and thick, wooded hills. I didn't pick one of the official campsites. I wanted somewhere quieter, more isolated. So I drove deep into the forest, far past the regular pull-off spots, until I found a barely visible side path that led into a small clearing. The clearing looked flat enough to pitch a tent and had a little ridge behind it that blocked the view from the road. I liked it right away. The weather was cool but dry, and the trees were a mix of orange, yellow, and brown. I set up my tent at the edge of the clearing, near the treeline. I had brought a cooler of food, a small propane stove, and my old .22 rifle. Not for hunting, just for peace of mind. I hadn't used it in years, but I liked having it with me when I camped alone. The first night was uneventful. I made some beans and rice, drank a couple of beers, and listened to the woods. The crickets were loud, and every so often I'd hear a raccoon or possum rustling through the leaves. It was peaceful. I fell asleep not long after dark and didn't wake up until the sun started coming through the tent. The second day, I did a bit of hiking along the ridge. I didn't bring a GPS, but I marked a few trees with small cuts on the bark to make sure I could find my way back. I spent a few hours walking, not really looking for anything in particular, just moving, letting my head clear. When I got back, I made a fire and cooked some sausage I'd brought. The air was colder that night, and the fire felt good. Around midnight, I woke up suddenly. It wasn't from a noise. It was more of a feeling, like my body had registered something off. I lay still in my sleeping bag, listening. The forest was quiet, too quiet. No wind, no insects, no small animal sounds. Just silence. Then I heard something. A slow crunch of leaves, not far off. Then another. It was someone walking, or at least something heavy. Not a deer. It didn't move fast or light. The steps came from the direction of the ridge. I sat up, reached for the flashlight and the rifle. My heart was pounding. I didn't turn the light on. I didn't want to give away where I was. The footsteps kept coming slow, deliberate, and close. I couldn't see much through the tent. I held the rifle across my lap, still sitting. The steps stopped maybe 20 feet from the tent. Then nothing. No more movement. No breathing. Just silence again. I waited like that for at least an hour, maybe longer. My legs went numb. I didn't dare unzip the tent. Eventually, I heard the crunch of leaves again, this time moving away. Not fast, just steady, like whoever or whatever it was didn't care if I heard it leave. The next morning, I stepped outside the tent and walked around the camp. I expected to see footprints or some sign, but the leaves were thick, and if there had been tracks, they were already half covered. I didn't see anything obvious, but I knew what I'd heard. That wasn't my imagination. I thought about packing up and heading out, but I talked myself into staying one more night. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe it had been a deer or a bear. I'd heard of black bears in that area, though I'd never seen one. Either way, I didn't want to run just because of some unknown sound. That day, I stayed close to camp. I kept the rifle near me and moved quietly. I didn't make a fire that night. I didn't want to draw attention. I ate cold food, sat in the tent with the light off, and kept the rifle on my chest. At some point, maybe around 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, careful, coming from a different direction this time, down the hill from where the old side path met the gravel road. I froze. The sound came closer and stopped just outside the clearing. Then I heard a sound that made my stomach twist. A metallic click, soft but sharp. It sounded exactly like the cocking of a gun. I didn't move. My breathing got shallow. I waited in total silence. No other sound came. Whoever it was didn't come into the clearing. They just stood there. I could feel them out there, watching, listening. The hair on my arms stood up. My hands were sweating on the rifle. Then, after maybe 15 or 20 minutes, the sound of leaves came again. this time moving away. I waited another hour before I moved. That was it for me. As soon as the sky lightened even slightly, I packed everything up. I didn't eat. I didn't even take down the tent properly. I just threw everything into the back of the SUV and drove out of there fast, bouncing hard over the rocks and ruts of the old path. I didn't stop until I was out of the forest and back on paved road. Later that afternoon, when I got to a gas station outside of Jasper, I noticed something strange. My rear passenger side tire had a long, clean gash in it, almost like it had been cut with a knife. Not torn from a rock or worn down, cut. It hadn't gone flat, but it was definitely leaking. I changed it out and kept driving. I didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. I don't know what was out there those nights, but I know it was human. The footsteps, the way it moved, the sound of the gun. It wasn't an animal, and it wasn't my mind playing tricks. Someone was watching me, stalking the camp, waiting, and I think they had been there longer than I realized. Looking back, I think I picked a spot that was too isolated. Too far from help, too far from other people. I thought I was getting away from everything, but I was really just making myself easy to find, easy to follow, easy to trap if someone wanted to. I haven't been camping alone since that trip. Not once. I still hike sometimes, still go out into the woods, but I don't sleep out there anymore, especially not alone. I don't know who was out there, and I don't want to. All I know is I was lucky I left when I did, because if I had stayed one more night, I don't think I'd be writing this now. I was 33 when I decided to camp alone in the remote hills near Okanagan, Washington. It was October 2021, and the trees had already started to shed their leaves. I had been working from home for almost 2 years straight and needed to get away from the screens and emails. I used to go camping with my uncle when I was a teenager, so I wasn't new to it. But I hadn't gone alone before, not really, and I hadn't been this deep into the woods either. I picked a spot that I found online way off the usual trails, where people said you could go for days without seeing another person. That was exactly what I wanted. Quiet, no one bothering me, just nature and time to think. I packed light, just a small tent, a sleeping bag, a portable stove, a water filter, a hatchet, a hunting knife, and enough food for 3 days. I had a basic emergency kit and a GPS with an offline map too. I even brought bear spray, although I wasn't too worried about that. I parked my old truck on the side of a narrow dirt road that cut through the woods, about 2 miles past a faded metal gate with a no trespassing sign that looked more like a leftover than something serious. The forest was thick here, tall pines, thick undergrowth, and barely a path to follow. I hiked about 1.5 miles off-road until I found a good flat area near a shallow stream. No signs of campers, no litter, no old fire pits. It felt untouched. The first day went by peacefully. I set up my tent and collected dry wood for a small fire, even though it had rained a few days earlier. I cooked some instant noodles, drank filtered stream water, and watched the sun sink below the trees. The forest turned quiet after dark. So quiet that I could hear every crack of a branch or flap of wings in the trees above. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was scared, but because it was too silent. I wasn't used to it. No traffic.
No lights.
No hum of anything. Just a darkness that felt endless and heavy. The second day was colder. The wind picked up and I noticed the clouds building up by noon. I gathered more wood, enough to keep a fire going through the evening, and walked along the stream for a bit to look for animal tracks. I found deer prints and some raccoon tracks, but nothing unusual. Still, I had a weird feeling in my gut, like I was being watched. I tried brushing it off. I figured it was just the loneliness getting to me. I saw something odd around dusk. While collecting branches near the edge of a small rocky hill, I saw fresh boot prints. Not hiking boots like mine, but deep, wide ones, heavier treads. Maybe military or construction type. They weren't there yesterday, and they weren't mine. I followed them a bit out of curiosity, but they disappeared into thick brush heading east, away from the stream. I didn't like that. I was far off any marked trail. No one should have been out here. I told myself maybe someone else was camping out here too, and I just hadn't seen them yet. That night, I kept the fire going longer. I sat closer to it, listening hard. No movement, no lights in the distance, just the wind moving through the trees. I eventually went into my tent around 10 p.m. I kept the zipper slightly open to hear outside. I had the knife next to me just in case. Sometime past midnight, I woke up. I don't know why. No sound. Just this sharp sense that something wasn't right. I stayed still for a while, listening. Then I heard it crunching. Slow footsteps on dried leaves. They were faint but clear. Someone or something was walking near the camp. I held my breath. The steps stopped. Then nothing. No talking. No fire. Just the night again. I didn't sleep after that. In the morning, I walked around my tent, looking for tracks. There were two. Just two clear boot prints near a pine tree about 15 feet from where I slept. Same tread pattern as the ones I saw before. Whoever it was, they were just standing there, not walking around, not coming closer, just watching. That made my stomach turn. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a hiker. That was a person. I made a decision. I'd leave that afternoon. I packed most of my stuff and kept only the essentials out: water, stove, and the firewood. I didn't want to look like I was scared, in case whoever was watching could still see me. Around 2 p.m., I noticed something else. A piece of bark had been peeled off one of the trees near my tent, and under it, someone had carved something. It was shallow and rough, like it had been done quickly with a knife. Just a line and two vertical cuts through it. It didn't look like initials or a symbol I recognized. It didn't matter. Someone had been close enough to mark the tree without me hearing. I put out my fire early and packed everything. I waited until the light started to fade before I quietly left. I didn't follow the way I came in. I cut east, toward the other side of the hill. I wanted to avoid whoever had been watching. I moved fast and quiet, trying not to break too many branches or leave a clear trail. Took longer than I thought to find the road again. The GPS was glitchy in the woods, and I kept stopping to listen for movement. I kept imagining footsteps behind me, but I never heard anything clear. Still, I didn't feel alone. I made it back to the truck just before full dark. The truck was untouched. I threw everything in the back without caring how it was packed. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I saw something that chilled me more than anything else that weekend. On my windshield, tucked under one of the wipers, was a strip of torn, greasy brown cloth, like part of an old glove or coat. It was wet from the air and smelled like oil and sweat. I looked around. Nothing. No cars. No people. Just the woods and the dark. I drove straight back to Spokane that night without stopping once. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. I just said the weather got bad and I cut the trip short. I didn't want people thinking I was being dramatic. I don't know who that person was or what they wanted. Maybe it was just a drifter or someone who lived out in the woods. But something about the way they stayed silent, the way they stood just outside the light, and that mark on the tree, it didn't feel like just bad luck. It felt planned. Since then, I've camped again, but never alone. And never in the same place twice. Whatever I ran into out there didn't need to say a word. They just needed me to know they were there. And that was enough. I was 34 that summer. It was August 2018, and I had taken a week off work to get away from everything. I'd been feeling drained, like something heavy had settled in my chest over the past few months. Too many emails, meetings, phone calls. Everything just felt loud and fast. I needed quiet. I needed space. I picked a spot I'd never been to before, a secluded area in the northern part of West Virginia, not far from the Monongahela National Forest, about 3 miles off a barely marked dirt road. It wasn't part of any official campground, just a patch of woods I found on an old hiking forum where people shared free dispersed camping spots. I had GPS coordinates, that was about it. I drove up in my truck, windows down, sun slipping lower through the trees. By the time I found a flat clearing near a slow-moving creek, it was already close to sunset. I backed the truck in, pulled out my tent, and started setting up. The ground was soft from a few recent rains, but not muddy. There was no one around for what felt like miles. No cell service either, but I expected that. After I pitched the tent, I gathered some rocks and made a small fire ring. I cooked a simple meal, canned chili and a few tortillas, then sat on a folding chair by the fire. It was dead quiet except for the water from the creek and the occasional rustle in the trees. I figured it was raccoons or squirrels. I'd brought bear spray just in case, but this part of the forest wasn't known for them. When it got dark, it got really dark. No city lights, no cars in the distance, nothing. I sat by the fire until it died down to red coals, then crawled into the tent and zipped myself in. I had a flashlight, a sleeping bag, and my old hiking pack beside me with my knife, snacks, and some gear. I fell asleep fast but woke up maybe 2 hours later. Something had changed. At first, I didn't know why I woke up. There weren't any loud noises, but after a few seconds I realized I'd heard something soft. I lay there listening. It was faint but steady, a scraping noise, not close, maybe 40 or 50 feet behind the tent. It wasn't twigs breaking or wind in the trees. It sounded rhythmic, like someone dragging something across the dirt slowly. I didn't move. I just stared at the dark ceiling of the tent. My ears tuned into everything. I waited. It stopped. The forest was quiet again, completely still. My fingers slowly wrapped around the handle of my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. Then I heard it again. Asterisk scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. Then a thump. Asterisk the hair on my arms stood up. I sat up in the tent without making noise and reached for the zipper. I moved slow. The noise didn't stop. I pulled the zipper halfway down and peeked out. It was pitch black. I couldn't see anything beyond a few feet. I clicked my flashlight on quickly and pointed it toward the sound. Trees, grass, nothing else. The noise had stopped again. I listened. Still nothing. After a while, I zipped the tent closed again but didn't sleep the rest of the night. When the sun rose, I got out and checked the area behind the tent. About 50 feet away, near a tree stump, I saw something strange. The ground was disturbed. A small hole had been dug, maybe 2 feet across, not very deep. It looked like someone had used a shovel, not an animal. The dirt was in a neat pile beside it. I looked around for prints, but the ground was soft and covered in leaves. I didn't see anything clear. I stood there a long time trying to think of some normal explanation. Maybe it was a hunter burying something. Maybe someone camped here before me and left it, but it looked fresh. The dirt was still damp, and the leaves nearby had been brushed aside. I felt nervous but told myself not to jump to conclusions. I spent the day hiking a few short trails near the creek and kept an eye out for anyone. I didn't see a soul. That night, I kept the fire going longer. I set a small pot of water on the fire just to give myself something to focus on. Around 11, I put the fire out, zipped into my tent, and kept the flashlight close. At some point during the night, I heard the noise again, but this time it was closer. That same scraping sound, followed by a pause, then more scraping, then something heavy hitting the ground. This time it sounded like it was coming from the opposite direction, maybe 20 feet from the tent, in the brush. I didn't move. I just listened. The rhythm was the same. It wasn't frantic, just steady, like someone slowly working on something. I clicked on the flashlight inside the tent and aimed it toward the sound through the fabric. The light made a pale circle on the wall of the tent but didn't show anything outside. The noise stopped again. I waited, holding my breath. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I didn't hear it again that night. In the morning, I forced myself to check. I walked around the camp slowly, scanning the ground. Took me about 10 minutes, but I found it. Another hole, smaller than the last one and closer to the tent. About a foot across, only maybe 6 inches deep. Same kind of pile of dirt beside it. Neat, not messy like an animal would leave it. I stared at it for a long time. I packed up my gear faster than I ever had in my life. Tent, stove, chair, everything into the truck. I didn't even bother with breakfast. My heart was pounding the whole time, and I kept glancing into the woods. I didn't hear or see anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there watching, digging, getting closer. As I drove down the dirt road, my tires bumping over roots and ruts, I told myself I'd report it. But report what? I hadn't seen anyone. No license plates, no voices, just holes in the ground and the sound of someone digging in the middle of the night. By the time I reached the main road, I pulled over and just sat there. My hands were shaking. I hadn't realized how tight my chest had gotten. My shirt was soaked with sweat. I never went back to that spot again. I didn't even finish the camping trip. I drove straight back home that day. I think about it a lot, though. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to be loud. They weren't trying to hurt me directly, at least not yet. But they were digging closer each night, slowly, like they were waiting for something, or measuring how close they could get without waking me. I'll never know what their plan was, or how long they'd been out there watching me. I just know that if I'd stayed another night, the next hole might have been right beside the tent. And I don't think it would have just been another hole.